Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Andrew Little and I'm a software architect here with TaxCycle and Xero. Today's webinar is going to be on our new tool called data mining. How does it differ from Client Manager? These are not the same thing. And then we'll wrap this up with a demonstration when we work with some T1 returns and some T2 returns to extract some information out of those returns to help identify particular returns that we're looking for, perhaps, extreme cases. So next. So what is data mining? So data mining is a tool that we've added to TaxCycle that you can use to identify tax returns. The tool allows you to query any form and pretty much any data point on any form, on any copy, including workflow to run on your current set of tax returns and produce a live report. The data mining tool will read the tax returns that you've selected based on some folders you can configure. And the query is run run then and there. It doesn't use a cache or a snapshot or anything like that. It physically scans all of the folders you've selected for the tax returns that you want to query. It opens them up read-only. It doesn't do any writing. And then it will query the return for the data points that you're after and then move on to the next return and so forth. So it's a little bit more real time. One thing we've had quite a bit of feedback over the years is having to specify indexes on slips or multiple forms or multi-forms that have multi-slips on them, or multiple tables, I should say. So the data mining tool has a set of functions to help with that. So instead of having to say, I want to look through all my T3 slips and specifying the first slip, the second slip, the third slip, etc., we have some functions built into data mining that allows you to do this on one line. It just says, look, for every T3 slip, just find any slip and any return that matches this criteria. I don't need to specify first, second, third. It would just know to look at them all. And lastly, because the tool does run on your tax returns in real time, you can optionally include tax folders that contain tax returns that may be outside of your monitored folders. For example, perhaps you take a copy of a set of returns and put them in a subfolder. You can tell the data mining tool just to look in that folder there. I mean, by default, the data mining tool asks Client Manager where are all the tax returns, so I can start running my queries. So if I can move on to the next slide. So how does this tool differ from Client Manager? Essentially, Client Manager saves a snapshot of the tax return when you click Save. The Client Manager server is notified. It looks at the return. The snapshot doesn't include all of the data from inside the tax return. We just capture a few key data points and we index those away. So when you run a search, we use these data points for filtering and so forth. Which is a bit of a limitation on the filtering because we can only filter on what we capture in that snapshot. So hopefully the data mining tool will address that, where we can essentially query returns on any data point in the return, whether it's been captured by Client Manager or not. And lastly, we feel, and I must say, it's a lot more flexible than, say, using Batch Calculate, where you can have, I think, up to 20 or so input columns or input fields where you can query to find those returns. So that is a very quick rundown of the data mining tool itself. So sometimes, or I feel the best way to show something is to actually demonstrate it and show it in action. So let's jump into a demo. So the data mining tool itself, it's new. It is accessible here from the sidebar if you wish to open it up without having a return. I'm going to go ahead and open return because you can access the data mining window from once a return is open. So here on the data tab, there is a new data mining button that we've added. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And I'm just going to resize my window slightly so it fits better. So first, this is the first step. There are essentially 3 steps to run your data mine query. The first is to construct your query and specify the fields in the return I want to look for. The second step is specifying where I want to find my returns and all the things I'm interested in seeing in my report. And of course, the last step is actually running the query and waiting a few moments for the results to come in. So in the first step here, I'll just walk us around the data mining window. There is no limit to the number of queries you can create. At the moment, I have 5 here created. You can create new ones, obviously create duplicates of existing queries. You can delete queries if you no longer use them, or perhaps you're just experimenting. We do actually have a neat export and import function, so you can take any particular query, you can export it to a particular folder, and then you can import it on another machine or someone else's machine that may not be sharing your options profile. All the queries you create and save can optionally be stored in your options profile, so they can be shared with everyone in the office. Or if you prefer to run your own queries using TaxCycle's standard options management, you can actually leave the data mining queries out of the standard options profile if you choose. So we can export and import those there. I'm just going to hide that. The top right-hand corner here does in fact show the current options profile that's in use, just in case your office does run more than one, because it may get confusing. Where did my query go? Well, it was in the other options profile that I was using. And simply clicking on the options profile there will open the options dialog on the new data mining section we have within options. Going down some further here, I've given this query a rather descriptive name. It's on my T-run returns. I might actually just change that. And so this particular query is set up to find all the T3 slips that I have where an issuer has been entered, it's not blank, and where the description or the account number is empty, because I normally like to have both entered at the same time. So this will help me find those returns. Just tab out of there. Control S to save my change. The data mining tool does come with a set of operators and functions to help, assist creating your queries. So we have the standard operator list of, I want this and this other criteria to be met, or I want this or this other criteria to be met for it to be a successful match, plus all the standard equals and not equals greater than and so forth. We do have a set of handy built-in functions as well to help craft your query. We have things that we can capitalize. We can use keywords like contains, so that's quite useful, as we'll see that a bit later. Like, I want to find all my slips where the name contains a particular block of text. I don't know the exact name, but I kind of know roughly what's in it. We can use the contains function for that. And the standard is empty, not empty. We'll get to this a bit later as well, where we demonstrate where we can actually add tasks to the query, like I want to see if my engagement forms have been sent or not, plus some other information on the returns being entered, and so forth. And lastly, here on the right-hand side, to help construct queries, the syntax language we have here is basically exactly the same as what we use in the template editor. So if you've created your own templates for correspondence with your clients, this should look very familiar. It's exactly the same syntax. Now, however, what we do have here is we have a large set of examples that we sort of asked some clients based on some community feedback or some questions we've received through our support line about, you're out there, you're asking, how do I do this, or how do I do that, or I want to find particular returns. So based on that feedback, we decided to add a whole set of example built-in queries that we can play with a bit later, once I get through the first stage of the demo. I'll just quickly switch to the bottom here. So we have some options that you'll probably just set once. One is syntax highlighting. You'll notice that some of the functions are highlighted in purple and so forth. So we applied some of this just to make where a function with some text or some money value stands out, just to make them easier to see on screen. Enable text for drop downs and so forth. So rather than having to type in the query window, what we do have here is you can simply go and find the field that you want. So for example, I'm going to pick a marital status, and you can just simply drag that over, and there we go. So with enable text for checkboxes and drop-downs enabled, the data mining tool has identified the field that you've dropped onto the query, and then it's actually given us a list here, if it's a drop-down list of all the available options. Oh, I actually want that to be mirrored. I don't want that to be common law. So I can go ahead and do that. For example, I can just drop the sin on. Oops, I dropped that in the middle. Let me just drop that here, and so forth. So we can say the sin is that particular number, or we can say the sin is empty or not empty, depending on what you want to do. We can use those other operators here, and so forth. Now we'll just switch quickly over here to this enable automatic conversion of multi-forms and field codes. I alluded to this earlier, that the data mining tool has a set of functions built in, and one of those functions is our for each function. And the way that this is set up, I'll just switch to my T3 form to make it easier to follow along. Essentially what this is saying, I'll just focus this one line, is for each T3 slip, as we can see down here in our little handy field code display here within TaxCycle, I want to find any T3 slip where this particular field code, in this case the identification issuer, is not empty. So the data mining tool will look at every single copy of every single taxpayer within the return of the T3 slip to see if that matches. I don't need to specify individual indexes. Now, if I turn that off, just to demonstrate that, if I was to drag this over, we'll see here this is more perhaps the client manager batch calculate way of doing things, where this is saying where the first T3 slip, in this case, equals Jane's estate and trust, because that was the text in the field. Perhaps if I switch over to Andrew's return here, I can just drag this one over here. As you can see, this is my second slip, and it's added the one there for me. Now, rather than having to do this for who knows how many slips you have, by naming this automatic conversion, if I come back to spouse return, Marlene, and I can just drag this over, it automatically does the for each syntax for me. So it knows that the T3 is a multi-slip form. There can be more than one, and I want to go through and query all those particular those fields. Of course, you're not limited to just text fields. Of course, you can drag monetary fields on there as well. In this case here, I want to see all of my capital gains where it's greater than or equal to $50. I can put any amount in there I want. So I can say it's 0, so it's not equal to 0, greater than or equal to 0, etc. So I'm just going to go ahead and strip this back. The last thing I'll call out here is this green line with the double forward slashes. This is called a comment. This is just some text free text you can add to your query. It doesn't get executed. It essentially gets ignored before the query is run. But it's a great little way you can put some extra comments or some extra notes about what the query is trying to achieve, or some other discoveries that you may have had when creating your query. And lastly, just turning my attention back to this last checkbox, this show field descriptions, this if eligible. So for example, if I put this in on here, with the exception of functions, if the field code can be extracted, we also display what its description is down here so you can see what the field is. I'm just going to hide that for now because I want more screen real estate. The last thing we do here, we have a little bit of assistance. So if I delete that last bracket, oh, it's going to do it for me. There we go. Took a moment to catch up. We do have a little bit of assistance here to indicate that we have our brackets, our parentheses aren't quite matched up properly. So if I fix it up, then the warning goes away, just to help identify where the brackets open and close. I know with perhaps a large query that can get quite complicated figuring out where they are and so forth. So I've got my T3 slips query here ready to go. So now I'm actually going to go ahead and run it. I'll just get rid of that comment. I'll click next. So the next step of using the data mining tool is we can configure our options about what we want to do. And there's quite a lot of power here to specify the types of returns and where those returns are located. And once you find a return, what you want to do with it before you actually start reading values out. So the first option here is choose the folders containing tax returns. These three boxes here are all expandable, so I'm going to go ahead and expand that. So by default for this particular session, I've configured a path in my webinar subfolder where I keep my tax returns. The first checkbox here on the left is if I actually even want to include this in my query. So I can actually load this up with several different folders and then select which ones I want to run. And of course, on the right-hand side, we can say, well, I want to scan all the tax returns inside of this folder plus any subfolders, so I don't have to add each subfolder manually. And of course, what we can do is, and this option's on by default, we can simply say, have the data mining tool, go ask Client Manager, where are the monitored folders? You should know where the returns are. Just give me that list of returns. There's no need for you to actually specify where those folders are. And of course, we can click at the Add Folder and Remove Folder to further customize that, or add folders that would be outside of where Client Manager is looking. So I'll just collapse that because I'm happy that's where my tax returns are now. The next option we have is the types of tax returns we want to scan. Now, the data mining tool is constrained to one type of tax return. So your query will focus on T1 or T2 or T3 returns and so forth. That kind of makes sense because, I mean, outside of the engagement form, a T1 and a T4 return don't really have that many fields in common. So here you get to choose which module you want to run. Now, if I was to create a new query and I had a T1 return open, it will default to T1. Or conversely, if I had a T2 return open when I created a new query, it will automatically select T2 for me, because we assume that's the particular return you'll be looking to drag fields from to create your query on the first step. Coupled with the module type, we can actually specify the individual years. Like in this case here, I'm only going to scan my 2023 T1 returns. You can obviously add older returns or newer returns and so forth. If you want to be a bit more advanced and say, look, I don't really want to be locked into a particular year, but what I want to do is I want to say any T1 tax return that I've saved in the last 2 weeks, I want to be included in this query. If the return was saved a year ago, I don't care about it. But anything saved 14 days ago, I want to be included in this query by default. Of course, you can select all to delete that. You can also specify returns the year start or year end. This is more helpful for returns outside of T1. For T1, the year start and year end is the 1st of January, 31st of December. But for my particular query, I'm going to focus just on my 2023 returns. This is just so that my results run a bit faster. I'm happy with my options. I'm just going to go and close that down. And then lastly, some more advanced options here. We can opt to have the results display. Look, I couldn't query these particular returns or this number of returns because they had a password protecting the return. The query data mining cannot open password protected returns. This is in line with Client Manager's behavior. It cannot index password protected returns. Those returns are password protected and secured, and we do not want the data being indexed elsewhere. We can also count the file read errors just in case the data mining tool is unable to open a return for any particular reason. Perhaps the folder doesn't exist, etc. This is a very technical setting, preload file metadata. We recommend we leave this on. Essentially what happens is when we open the first return, all the resources that we use in the background to read data from that return stay in the background. So when you get to the second, third, fourth return, they get processed much, much faster. I don't think you'd ever turn that off, but we left it in there just in case. Calculation mode, you can have the data mining tool run a calculate and review, or a calculate, review, and optimize on the return before we read the values. Now, I will reiterate this. The data mining tool does not change the return. It opens the return read-only. It runs a calculation mode if it's been selected, and then it disregards all those changes and never ever saves back to the return. It's just a tool for reading data out of the return. So I'm going to leave my calculate mode as none for this. I'm going to leave these all default. And so forth. And obviously we can choose as well the particular output language that I want to use for my report. So perhaps I just want to see everything in French, or I want to see everything in English. I'm going to go ahead and close that. So the next large section we see here are our columns that we want to see in our report. If I go back, here we have two functions. We have the issuer and the description. But I may want to see more information than that in my report. So, of course, what we can do, say for engagement, I actually want to see what the client ID is. I can simply drag that on and so forth. So what's going to happen, all the fields and the columns you see in here that are listed will be included in my report. Any fields that you select as part of your query, they are also included in the report. Unfortunately, in this example, I only have two functions. But if you had a static field, they would show on this list as well. You can optionally include to say, look, for this particular run, I'm also going to include the client ID. You can leave these columns here. You can just opt to have them out of the report for this particular run or include them. And lastly, here on the right-hand column, you can specify how you want this number to be formatted. So in fact, I might just also go add the social insurance number. I'm going to move that to the top. And I'm going to say, I want that masked. So that will obviously mask the first 6 digits of the SIN number and so forth. The default is basically saying, however TaxCycle formats it, that's how I want my results to look. Or you can come in and customize it and say, I really want to see lots of decimal places and so forth. Or we also include the option of none, that is no formatting. So, currency symbols, percentage symbols, all that sort of stuff will be removed from results. So when we export that to CSV, you can work with the raw data. It's entirely up to you how you want to view that data. So that, I'm pretty happy with how my, the options, where I'm looking for my returns, the types of returns I want to look for, my options, and all of the particular columns that I want to see in my report. So now I'm going to go ahead and save my query and run it. And as we can see here, the data mining tool has scanned 6 returns. Some of these returns are coupled with dependents. And I see in my demonstration I left include non-matching on by default. So here are my results. Where possible, we do in fact read the values out of the return. For every return that is matched, you can click on it straight from the file path and it will open up in TaxCycle. You can go look at it. We do include some filters here. Whatever filters are applied to your search results, that is how what you see on screen with the filters is exactly what shows up in your report. So in this particular case here, I also want to include returns that didn't match my query. So I can see what did and what didn't match at the same time, or conversely, I can just see all the ones that didn't match. And for this example, I can say, look, I only just want to see returns that have a partner or a dependent, or just the partner, and so forth. So I can just filter the returns that matched or didn't match, and then based on that, who's actually in the return. And then I'm going to go ahead and export my result here. And I've already configured a particular folder for my exports to go to. So I'll save that, and that's created. So now that we've seen our results, we've exported our report. Again, I'll just reiterate that where the report goes is based on this particular option here that I've configured in my data mining options. I can also add a default folder when I create a new query where I want to look for my tax returns. We can set up a few defaults. And of course, here is a complete list of all my queries and so forth, so I can potentially remove several all at once rather than having to delete them one at a time. So that's all very good. So I'm going to go and start over and back to the beginning. And I'm going to continue working away here with my T3 returns. What I've decided here, I also am very interested to know if any of my T3 slips, a third party gets a percentage of that trust. So I've just seen my percentage here, and I'm simply going to go and drag this over to here. I might have to put my and at the front. Now, by default, when you drag a field, whether it's a currency field or a text field, the data mining tool will put the value that's in the field into your query by default. We may change that to be optional. Perhaps you just prefer it to always be 0 if it's a money field, or you'd rather read the value. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to say it's more than 1%. So I'll go next. I'll save and rerun that. So as we can see here, Marlene here has actually matched that particular return. If I go back and start over. Now, some of my results here, if I just make this a bit bigger, it would be really convenient to see that. What you can do in this particular column selection, you can actually, in fact, also simply drag the field over. And we do support the for each function within your columns as well, so you can see each value. So I'm going to go ahead and drag those over there. And I'm quite fussy. I want to see 4 decimal places, please, on that particular third-party allocation. Go ahead and save and run that. And just for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to include my non-matching results. And because of the smaller screen resolution, we can see that there are all the particular values that have been read out and so forth. So we've got our issuer and our identification. That's our allocation, sorry. The column's a bit tiny. There we go. So we can see that there's Marlene's has her 4%. It's formatted to 4 decimal places. Andrew has 2 trusts. They're separated by this pipe character, and he has 0% each. So I might start over. Now that's an example of working with a T1 return. Now T2 returns are a bit more complex, and they have a few more multi-forms and slips and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and change my query query I've constructed to query my S50 shareholders. Oh, I made a change to my T1. I'm just going to go ahead and save that. Now, the first thing that data mining tool here has done is just given me a little warning here to say that the return I'm currently got active I'm working with is a T1 return, but this query targets T2 return. Well, that's okay. I'm just going to go and switch to my T2 return here. And as you can see, I just switch back and forth. The warning will come and go away as I work on the correct return. So this particular query here of my S50 shareholders, I basically want to find any shareholder where the trust number is not empty. So there's a value being entered into that. And the trust name contains any one of these values. There's actually an unlimited number of lists you can put, as many different texts in here as you want. Oops, there's another warning popping up. I'm missing a bracket. And so forth. Or you can simply just have one if you want. Like that. I'll just go put those back. I might just put just those 2 there like so. And then here I'm going to go ahead and run that. Again, here I'm going to be using the same particular folder as my T1s because I know I've got some T2 returns in there. T2 returns, I'm not specifying any year. I'm happy to scan every one that I have. My standard options. Here there's a lot more information included in the column report. The column defaults are essentially the standard identification number, the client's name, corporation, trust, or first and last names, and the standard engagement forms. If I was to click Add Defaults. And here in this particular query, the T2 balance payable is also included because that is one of the fields in my query. By default, we figure if you want to see what if you're querying on a particular field, that you may actually want to see what's in it in the report. Again, I can optionally include or exclude that particular field if I want to, but I'm happy with where that's at. And then I'm going to go save and run. And there we go again. Oh, I should scroll back to the left. We can see that based on my particular query that Brenda's blinds here, my 2023 return here has actually met. It's identified the return that where the trust number is not that, and there's a particular name in the trust number, and so forth. So that's pretty powerful. Unlike say the batch calculator having to specify things one at a time, you can just use this for each function to go through as many as you want. Just expanding on that a little bit more, I've got another query here in my S100. Oh, and that side changes. Let me flick over to my S100. So this particular query here is saying if the business number of the return is not empty, we have this other little function here called Giphy balances. Then this particular function here allows me to go through all my individual Giphy balances values within the S100 or the S125. So this particular query is saying, looking at my long-term liabilities, which are down here, and it's saying if the total of my long-term liabilities for 3140 and 3141 are greater than 10,000 and the same ones are less than $10,001, then I want to see that particular return. So I can go ahead and save and run that. Again, I've actually put those particular values into my output columns. Go ahead and run that on my T2. And there we go. We've Brenda's blinds, in this particular case, the SAM return has met that criteria. If I start over, you don't have to do the AND if you don't wish. You can say if the Giphy, if I break it back, and I can just start adding some more. So 3145 is greater than 10,000 and so forth. So any particular T2 return where the S100 has long-term liabilities of these particular values and these particular fields, that exceed a certain amount, they can be 10,000 or it can be more than 0 and so forth. So that is an example of working with more advanced forms. If I switch back to my T1 return here, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new query, I'll save changes to that. By default, when I create a new query, we have a standard balance owing or the equivalent of each different return included by default. I just wanted to talk through some of the other built-in examples we had. For example, something more simple, like I want to know the foreign property is more than someone has foreign property. If I go to my info form here, now the check boxes that are yes or no, you can simply type yes or no. You don't have to know what the index is, and it doesn't matter what language you use. The data mining tool doesn't matter. It knows if you mean yes or it knows if you mean no. What's another more complex example here? Student loan returns. Again, this is a combination of I'm looking at all these particular amounts in these particular fields. I show my field descriptions. It should give you a nice description of what they are because I'm not using functions and so forth. So that's just combining, in this case, 6 individual field queries into one where any of these conditions are met because I'm using an OR statement. And then obviously I can add something on the end or I can run it just like that. One last example here. Yes, this has got T1, T25. So in this case here, I like my T3 slips for each T2125 form. I want to know if any form has gross income over $1, or I can say over $10,000 if I want. And that will go through, open all my T1 returns. Based on my selections here, a new query has all these selected by default. I'm not going to include client manager. I'm going to T1 returns. Perhaps I'll keep returns that are saved after a certain date, say February 4th, and then I can go ahead and save and run that query if I so choose. If I go back to my T3 slip here, I'll discard those changes. The one last item I wanted to call out was the workflow. I did mention earlier that you can query workflow. So if we come over to our track tab here, I can right-click on my particular item and say copy ID for data mining. So I come with that and I paste it over here. That is a shortcut way of saying if this task is not complete, the planning task, we do have these functions available down here as task is not complete or is complete. By default, this one defaulted to is not complete because that workflow item is not complete. If I actually check that to complete it, copy for data mining, paste that, now it will default to is task complete. So I can simply add that like so. I'll save this return. Of course, the query tool only looks at returns that are saved, not ones that are unsaved, and go from there. I'll save that, and then Marlene's return has matched that criteria. So if I start over, the planning is complete. The issuer has a value in it, and the description is empty, and an allocation of more than 1%. So there I've combined 4 different data points from 2 different forms to construct a query to help identify those returns. So that is all I have for today. I would encourage you to look if you're interested in the data mining tool. We have a lot of documentation on our data mining tool, including how to construct queries and so forth, and how to use each aspect of the tool to help you get started, or if I was missing some information, perhaps you wanted to come and revisit.